The end of the world did not come with a roar, but with a quiet, fading exhale. For Izuku Midoriya, the sky above was a canvas of bruised purples and sickening reds, choked by the dust of shattered cities. The air tasted of copper and pulverized concrete. He lay on his back, every nerve in his body screaming a final, agonizing symphony before fading into the blissful numbness that precedes death. He couldn't feel his arms. He wasn't entirely sure they were still there. His legs were shattered, the bones ground into powder beneath the ruined, blood-soaked fabric of his costume. But as his vision blurred, dimming at the edges like a fading old photograph, he saw it. The monster was gone. Where Tamura Shigaraki, and the ancient, parasitic evil of All for One, had stood just moments before, there was only a crater. A massive, smoking gouge in the earth that stretched for miles, the epicenter of a shockwave that had flattened what little remained of the battlefield. The cycle of hatred, the century-long nightmare that had plagued humanity, had finally been reduced to ash. Izuku let out a shuddering, wet breath. I did it, he thought, though his mind was slipping away, the thoughts sluggish and fragmented. One for all, it's quiet now. Inside him, the roaring inferno of power that he had carried for so long was nothing more than a dying ember. He couldn't feel the presence of the first, of Nana, of Banjo, of the others. They had poured their souls, their very essences, into that final strike. 1,000,000%. More than 1,000,000. A singularity of pure, self-sacrificing will. They were gone. The quirk was gone. And now, Izuku was following them. He blinked slowly. The red sky was beginning to turn black. Was it nightfall, or was it just his eyes? He thought of his mother. He hoped she was safe in the evacuation shelters. He thought of Uraraka, of Ada, of Todoroki, of Kaken. He hoped they would forgive him for leaving them behind. He hoped they would build a better world on the ashes of this one. A world where children wouldn't have to break their bodies to smile. A smiling hero, he mused, the corners of his bloody mouth twitching upward in a weak, trembling grin. Tears pooled in his eyes, cutting tracks through the soot and blood on his freckled cheeks. He was terrified. He was so cold. But as the dark closed in, entirely encompassing his vision, the fear was eclipsed by a profound, overwhelming peace. He had saved them. He had done his job. Izuku Midoriya closed his eyes for the last time. His chest fell, and it did not rise again. The boy who was quirkless, the boy who became the world's greatest hero, slipped away into the dark. Then, there was nothing. For a year. For a decade. For a century. For an age. Nothing. Centuries later, the rain fell in relentless, heavy sheets across the rusted skeleton of a dead metropolis. This place had many names over the eons. Once it was Tokyo. Later, during the golden era of human expansion when the traveler arrived and breathed miracles into the solar system, it was Sector 7 North. Now, in the twilight of the Dark Age and the dawn of the City Age, it was simply known to scavengers and warlords as the Old Eastern Ruins. Nature had long since reclaimed what mankind had built. Towering skyscrapers were now vertical jungles, choked by massive vines and glowing, bioluminescent moss mutated by the strange energies of the collapse. The streets were canyons of rusted metal, submerged in deep, murky water. The hollowed-out shells of Golden Age automobiles and transit trains sat like the bones of dead leviathans. Drifting silently through this drowned graveyard was a small, geometric construct. It was a ghost. A tiny, autonomous machine, shaped like a multifaceted star, with a single, glowing blue optic at its center. Its shell was a pristine, matte white with deep blue accents, a stark contrast to the decay and rust surrounding it. Nothing here, the ghost thought, emitting a soft, melancholic chime that was instantly swallowed by the sound of the rain. Nothing but ghosts. And not the good kind. The ghost, who had taken to calling himself Aegis, expanded his shell, sending out a wide-band sonar-like ping of light. The invisible wave of paracausal energy swept through a collapsed subterranean subway station beneath him, searching, probing, looking for a very specific resonance. Aegis was tired. He had been born from the dying breath of the traveler centuries ago, during the collapse, when the darkness had swallowed the solar system. Since that day, his single, driving purpose had been to find his guardian. The one soul perfectly attuned to his light, someone worthy to be resurrected and join the fight to protect humanity's last remnants. He had searched the frozen tundras of old Russia. He had scoured the glass deserts of North America. He had braved the toxic swamps of the European dead zone. And he had found nothing. Other ghosts had found their partners decades ago. Some had found mighty warriors who joined the newly formed vanguard. Others had found ruthless killers who became warlords, a fact that made Aegis shudder. But Aegis had remained alone. Maybe I'm broken, Aegis murmured aloud, his synthetic voice echoing slightly in the damp air. Maybe my guardian was vaporized. Or maybe they were on one of the colony's ships that never made it out. He floated down into the gaping maw of the subway station. The darkness was absolute, save for the beam of harsh white light Aegis projected from his eye. The tunnel was filled with debris, collapsed ferrocrete, twisted rebar, and the grim, calcified remains of those who had sought shelter here when the world ended. Aegis scanned bone after bone. Too brittle. No spark. This one died in fear. No resilience. This one, no, just empty. He moved deeper. The air grew thicker, smelling of ancient dust and stagnant water. Suddenly a sound echoed from the surface above. Click-clack hiss. Aegis's iris contracted in alarm. He instantly killed his flashlight, plunging himself into darkness, and tucked his shell tight against his core. He drifted up to a crack in the ceiling, peering toward the rain-slicked street above. Through the gloom, 4 figures were prowling. They were massive, insected aliens, walking on 2 digitigrade legs, with 4 arms extending from their torsos. They wore ragged cloaks and scavenged armor, holding rifles that crackled with volatile arc energy. Fallen, Aegis thought, his core spinning with anxiety. Elixni scavengers. House of Devils, by the look of their crimson cloaks. If they spot me, they'll strip my shell for parts and drain my light. Aegis needed to leave. The Fallen were thorough scavengers. They would eventually check the subway tunnel for Golden Age tech. He began to slowly drift backward, intending to slip out through a drainage pipe. But as he moved backward, his lower shell bumped into something metallic buried beneath a pile of rubble. Ding! The sound was impossibly soft, but to Aegis, it was like a gong. A faint, almost imperceptible frequency washed over his sensors. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't electromagnetic. It was a frequency of the soul, a dormant, ancient spark of willpower that had lain dormant in the earth for centuries, defying the decay of time. Aegis spun around. He focused his optic on a pile of massive, collapsed concrete pillars. Beneath them, barely visible, was a skeleton. The bones were encased in what looked like the rotting, fossilized remains of a strange, dark green garment. But what had caught Aegis's shell was a chunk of rusted, heavy metal attached to the skeleton's leg, what looked like the remains of an iron-soled boot. Aegis expanded his shell, ignoring the danger of the Fallen above. He sent a concentrated beam of scanning light directly into the center of the skeleton's chest cavity. The feedback was instantaneous and overwhelming. Aegis's optic flared so bright it illuminated the entire subway tunnel in brilliant, blinding white. Data cascaded through his mind. Courage. Unyielding. Self-sacrifice. A desire to protect. The spark wasn't just alive, it was a roaring, dormant star waiting to be ignited. The sheer density of heroism etched into the marrow of these ancient bones was staggering. "Oh, traveler," Aegis whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and relief. "It's you. I found you. I finally found you." Above, a fallen vandal hissed, hearing the ghost's voice and seeing the flash of light through the cracks in the street. The scavenger barked an order in its guttural, clicking language, and heavy footsteps began to stomp toward the subway entrance. "No time," Aegis muttered. "No time for the speech. Let's just hope you wake up swinging." Aegis floated directly over the skeleton's chest. The ghost shell detached into multiple floating pieces, orbiting his glowing core. He tapped into the infinite, power-causal reservoir of the traveler. "Guardian," Aegis commanded, his voice suddenly losing its nervousness, echoing with the ancient, resonant authority of the light. "Eyes up." A beam of pure, concentrated light erupted from Aegis's core, striking the skeleton. The effect was miraculous and violent. The light acted as a forge, reversing entropy. Dust gathered. Flesh wove itself together over bone. Veins branched out like lightning strikes, pumping newly created, oxygen-rich blood. Muscle fibers snapped into place, thick and scarred. Nerves ignited. The rotting fabric of the ancient clothes was pushed aside as a body was reconstructed in an instant, perfect and whole, exactly as it was at the moment of its prime, yet purged of the fatal damage that had ended it. Green hair, wild and unruly, sprouted from the scalp. Freckles painted themselves across pale cheeks. Then, the heart beat. Thump. Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open. His first breath was a desperate, gasping choke, like a man breaking the surface of the ocean after nearly drowning. He shot upward, his back arching, coughing violently as the stale air of the tunnel hit his newly forged lungs. Gah! Ah! Izuku scrambled backward, his hands desperately clutching his chest. Pain. Fire. Where is Shigaraki? Where is the crater? He looked down at his hands. They were his hands. They were covered in scars, the jagged, familiar lightning bolt scars from his time at UA. But they weren't broken. They weren't bleeding. He squeezed his fists. The strength in them was immense, a coiled spring of vitality he hadn't felt since. Izuku froze. Since when? A terrifying, suffocating void opened up in his mind. He tried to grasp a memory. He tried to remember how he got here. He remembered a red sky. He remembered a punch. He remembered a smile. But who was he punching? Who was he smiling for? He tried to think of his mother's face. Nothing. Just a blurry shape and a feeling of warmth. He tried to think of his own name. A blank slate. A horrific, empty white room in his brain. What is this? Izuku panicked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, echoing in the damp tunnel. He looked around. He was sitting in a puddle of water, surrounded by rubble, wearing rags that barely covered him. Hello? A voice chirped. Izuku flinched, his combat instincts, which had entirely survived the memory wipe, kicking in instantly. He scrambled to his feet, adopting a low, defensive martial arts stance. His eyes darted around until they locked onto a small, floating mechanical eye with a white and blue shell. Whoa, easy, the machine said, floating back a few inches. I know this is incredibly disorienting. You've been dead for a very, very long time. But you're safe now. I am a ghost. More importantly, I'm your ghost. My what? Izuku breathed, his emerald eyes wide with confusion. Dead? What do you mean dead? Who are you? Where am I? Who am I? Aegis's optics softened, drooping slightly in sympathy. I know. The amnesia is a side effect of the resurrection. You are a guardian of the traveler. You were chosen by the light to defend humanity. You don't have your past, but you have a future. Izuku slowly lowered his hands, his mind reeling, trying to process the absolute absurdity of the floating robot's words. Resurrection? Light? Guardian? It sounded like a comic book, but the cold water on his bare feet felt real. The chill in the air felt real. Before Izuku could ask another question, the ceiling of the tunnel exploded. Massive chunks of ferrocrete rained down. Izuku's body moved before his brain could even register the threat. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was pure, unadulterated muscle memory. He leapt backward, twisting his body in midair, clearing a 30-foot gap with a single bound, landing softly on a rusted train car as the rubble crushed the spot where he had just been standing. Through the hole in the ceiling dropped 3 nightmares. They were tall, taller than any man Izuku had ever seen. They had gray, mottled skin, 4 glowing blue eyes, and 4 arms. 2 of them were thinner, wearing scavenged metal plates and wielding long, jagged knives and small sidearms that sparked with electricity. The third was massive, draped in a heavy, tattered red cape, holding a long rifle that hummed with lethal energy. Fallen! Aegis yelled, instantly transmatting himself into an invisible pocket of energy connected to Izuku's light, disappearing from sight but speaking directly into Izuku's mind. Guardian, we need to run. That's a captain and 2 dregs. You don't have a weapon. Izuku didn't respond. His breathing slowed. The panic of amnesia was suddenly compartmentalized, shoved into a box in the back of his mind. Right now, there was a threat. Right now, there were monsters, the dregs hissed, spotting the humans standing on the train car. One of them raised its shock pistol and fired. A bolt of crackling blue energy ripped through the air. Izuku didn't just dodge it. He analyzed it in a microsecond. Projectile speed is roughly 200 meters per second. Linear trajectory. Slower than a bullet. He tilted his head to the left. The arc bolt singed the tips of his green hair as it flew past. The fallen captain roared a command. The two dregs holstered their pistols, drew their arc daggers, and charged, leaping toward the train car with surprising agility. Okay, Izuku thought, his eyes narrowing, his analytical mind booting up like a supercomputer. Two opponents closing in for melee. High agility. Multiple limbs mean unpredictable striking patterns. I need to keep my distance or disarm them. Guardian, run! Aegis screamed in his head. I don't think they're going to let us, Izuku muttered. As the first dreg landed on the train car and lunged with a dual knife strike, Izuku stepped into the guard. He parried the upper right arm with his left forearm, trapped the lower right arm with his own elbow, and delivered a devastating, twisting palm strike to the alien's chest. The impact was sickening. Even without any powers activated, Izuku's base physical strength, honed by years of carrying a godlike quirk in his past life, was immense. The dreg's chest plate crumpled. The alien let out a wet gasp and was launched backward, tumbling off the train car and splashing into the water below, unconscious. The second dreg hesitated, its four eyes widening in shock. Humans without guns did not fight like this. Lightless humans were prey. Izuku didn't wait for it to recover. He swept his leg in a low arc, knocking the dreg off its feet, then followed up with a spinning hook kick that caught the alien squarely in the jaw. The dreg flipped in the air and crashed down, out cold. Incredible, Aegis whispered in Izuku's mind, his synthetic voice laced with awe. But the fight wasn't over. A blinding purple light bathed the tunnel. The fallen captain had raised its shrapnel launcher. It didn't care about its fallen subordinates. It fired a widespread volley of superheated solar shrapnel directly at the train car. Look out! Aegis yelled. Izuku pushed off his legs, diving off the train car just as the solar blast impacted, melting the rusted metal into slag. He hit the ground rolling, splashing through the knee-deep water, seeking cover behind a concrete pillar. The captain barked a laugh, dropping the heavy launcher and drawing two massive, glowing arc blades. It leaped down from the debris, splashing into the water, and began stalking toward the pillar. Guardian, you can't fight a captain bare-handed, Aegis pleaded. Their shields are too strong. You need a weapon. Channel the light. Use your light. Light? What light? Izuku shouted back, peering around the pillar. The captain was closing in, its blades crackling with lethal voltage. The energy inside you. Feel for it. It's in your chest, in your spark. Pull it out. Izuku pressed his back against the pillar. Energy inside him? He closed his eyes. He ignored the heavy splashing of the approaching alien. He ignored the cold rain pouring through the ceiling. He looked inward, there. It wasn't the roaring, burning, sun-like inferno he vaguely remembered holding in a past life. This was different. It felt like a storm. It felt like holding a thunderhead in the palm of his hand. It was wild, crackling, begging to be unleashed. It tasted of ozone and static. Arc, Izuku thought, though he didn't know where the word came from. It feels like full cowling. But sharper. The captain rounded the pillar, roaring, bringing both arc blades down in a crossed execution strike. Izuku's eyes snapped open. They were no longer just emerald green. They were glowing with a blinding, incandescent blue-white electricity. He didn't block. He didn't dodge. Izuku channeled the arc light, not just into his fists like a traditional titan, but flushing it through his entire nervous system, recreating the subconscious muscle memory of his old fighting style. Lightning erupted from his body, wreathing him in a halo of violent, crackling energy. Shoot style. Izuku stepped forward, slipping inside the arc of the captain's blades. He planted his left foot, the rusted iron sole of his ancient boot scraping against the concrete, and channeled all the arc light into his right leg and his right fist. He twisted his hips, torquing his body like a coiled spring, and unleashed an upward, rising punch straight into the captain's jaw. It wasn't just a physical strike. It was a detonation of paracausal energy. The arc light exploded on impact. A shockwave of blue lightning shattered the captain's arc shield like glass. The sheer kinetic force of the blow lifted the 800-pound alien clean off its feet, launching it upward with the force of a localized hurricane. The captain slammed into the ceiling of the subway tunnel, 40 feet in the air, cracking the ferrocrete, before plummeting back down and crashing into the water, utterly broken and unconscious. Silence descended on the tunnel, save for the gentle patter of rain and the harsh, heavy breathing of the green-haired boy. The crackling blue lightning slowly faded from Izuku's skin, retreating back into his core. He stood there, his fist still raised, steam rolling off his wet, scarred skin. He stared at his hand in absolute disbelief. What was that? Izuku whispered, his voice shaking. Was that a quirk? Did I do that? A flurry of white and blue geometric shapes materialized over his shoulder, as Aegis transmatted back into the physical world. The ghost's optic was spinning rapidly, a sign of extreme excitement. A quirk? I don't know what that is, Aegis said, his voice practically buzzing. But that, my friend, was the Traveler's Light. You're an arc wielder, and a Titan, judging by the sheer concussive force, though I've never seen a Titan move with that kind of agility before. Usually, they just shoulder charge things. That was incredible. Izuku slowly lowered his arm. The adrenaline was fading, and the cold reality of his situation was crashing back down on him. He looked at the unconscious monsters, then at the floating machine, and finally down at himself. He was wearing rotting rags. He was shivering. He had no idea who he was. His knees buckled, and he dropped heavily onto a dry patch of concrete, pulling his knees to his chest. I don't remember anything, Izuku said, his voice small, breaking slightly. The tears he had held back during the fight finally spilled over. You say I'm a guardian. You say I'm supposed to protect people, but I don't even know my own name. How can I be a hero if I don't know who I am? Aegis floated down, hovering gently in front of Izuku's face. The ghost projected a small, warm beam of light, like a tiny campfire, offering a bit of heat. Listen to me, Aegis said softly. In the city, there are thousands of guardians. None of us remember who we were before we woke up. It is the price we pay for the light. The past is gone, but who you were back then, it doesn't matter. What matters is who you choose to be now. Aegis bumped his shell gently against Izuku's forehead. You didn't hesitate. When those fallen attacked, you didn't freeze. You protected yourself, and you fought back. That courage? That's why I chose you. That's why the Traveler chose you. Izuku wiped his eyes with the back of his scarred hand. He looked at the ghost. Despite the metallic, synthetic nature of the machine, Izuku felt a profound sense of warmth and companionship radiating from it. What do I do now? Izuku asked. Now we get you geared up, we find a ship, and we go home. To the last city, Aegis said cheerfully. But first, we should probably figure out what to call you. Do you have any preferences? I've known guardians who named themselves after weapons, after old myths, or just made something up. Izuku looked around. His eyes fell upon the pile of rubble where he had been resurrected. He walked over to it, kneeling in the dirt. Mixed within the rotting, fossilized fabric of his ancient clothes was a small, oxidized metal plate. It looked like it had once been part of a belt or a harness. The metal was pitted and rusted by centuries of decay, but faintly, barely legible beneath the grime, were 4 embossed letters. It was a piece of his old hero costume. The nameplate he had proudly worn. He reached out and picked it up, rubbing the dirt off with his thumb. DKU. Izuku stared at the word. It triggered nothing in his memory. No faces, no places, no context. But as he looked at the 4 letters, a strange, phantom warmth spread through his chest. It felt right. It felt like something he had earned. It felt like a promise. Deku, Izuku read aloud. Aegis floated over his shoulder, scanning the plate. Deku? Is that a Golden Age word? What does it mean? Izuku looked up at the hole in the ceiling, out at the gray, rainy sky of this new, terrifying future. He didn't know what the word meant in the past. But he knew what it was going to mean now. He felt the dormant arc light thrumming in his veins, eager to be used, eager to protect. He turned back to the ghost, and for the first time since waking up from a centuries-long slumber, Izuku Midoriya smiled. It was a bright, determined expression that reached his emerald eyes. I think, Izuku said, his voice steadying, it means you can do it. Aegis bobbed in the air, his optics shining happily. Deku. I like it. It has a good ring to it. Welcome back to the land of the living, Deku. I'm Aegis. It's nice to meet you, Aegis, Deku said, standing up, his fists clenching with newfound resolve. Now, you mentioned a city that needs protecting. Point the way. The old Arcadia-class jumpship shuddered violently, its ancient thrusters screaming in protest as it tore through the dense, rain-swollen clouds of the European dead zone. Inside the cramped, rust-scented cockpit, Deku sat rigidly in the pilot's seat. He wasn't actually flying the vessel. Aegis was interfaced directly with the ship's antiquated NAV computer, his tiny white and blue shell plugged into a glowing dashboard port. But Deku still gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles were white. Is it supposed to shake this much? Deku asked, his voice strained as a particularly nasty pocket of turbulence rattled his teeth. He was still wearing the scavenged, mismatched pieces of rusted armor and rotted fabric he had woken up in. He felt cold, damp, and entirely out of his depth. Oh, absolutely not. Aegis chimed cheerfully from the console. This ship has been sitting in a rusted-out cosmodrome hangar for the better part of 3 centuries. The fact that the endless drive hasn't spontaneously inverted and atomized us is a minor miracle. The light provides. Deku blinked, staring at the ghost. That doesn't make me feel better, Aegis. Just hold on tight. We're clearing the storm front now. Adjusting altitude, diverting auxiliary power to inertial dampeners. The violent rattling began to smooth out, transitioning into a steady, powerful hum. The thick, gray soup of the storm clouds broke apart, washing the cockpit in sudden, blinding sunlight. Deku brought a hand up to shield his eyes. As his vision adjusted, he leaned forward, pressing his hands against the scratched, reinforced glass of the canopy. The breath hitched in his throat. Below them stretched the earth. But it was not an earth he recognized, or at least, not one the deepest, blankiest parts of his amnesiac mind expected. There were no sprawling grids of modern cities, no shining highways or bustling harbors. There were only sprawling, untamed wildernesses, vast mountain ranges tipped with pristine snow, endless oceans shimmering like crushed sapphires, and the deep, verdant green of nature that had reclaimed the scars of humanity's past. It was breathtakingly beautiful, yet tragically empty. Where is everyone? Deku whispered, his emerald eyes wide as he searched the horizon. You said there was a city. There is, Aegis replied, his voice softening. The ghost detached from the console and floated over to hover beside Deku's shoulder. Just one. When the collapse happened, the darkness swallowed almost everything. Billions perished. For centuries, the survivors were scattered, hunted by the fallen, the hive, and warlords. But then, they started to gather beneath the traveler. They built walls. They built a home. The last safe city on Earth. Aegis rotated his shell toward the front viewport. Look ahead, Deku. On the horizon, Deku followed the ghost's gaze. At first, it looked like a mountain range rising in the distance, but as the Arcadia-class ship sped closer, covering miles in seconds, the sheer, impossible geometry of the structure began to resolve. It was a wall. A monolithic, towering ring of white concrete, steel, and advanced polymers that dwarfed the mountains around it. It was so massive that it seemed to bend with the curvature of the earth, and nestled within the protective embrace of that titanic barrier was a sprawling metropolis. Millions of lights twinkled like stars against the afternoon shadows, skyscrapers, residential districts, bustling plazas, and industrial sectors, all weaving together into a tapestry of human survival. But Deku barely registered the city. His eyes were drawn upward. Suspended in the sky directly above the city was a sphere. It was utterly gargantuan, an artificial moon resting in the Earth's atmosphere. Its surface was a pearlescent, matte white, etched with intricate, incomprehensible geometric lines that glowed with a faint, pulsing blue light. The bottom of the sphere was heavily damaged, massive chunks of its shell hovering in stasis around its underbelly, exposing a glowing, crystalline core that radiated an aura of absolute warmth. Deku couldn't look away. As he stared at the traveler, a profound, physical sensation washed over him. The latent arc light in his blood, the crackling, restless energy that had allowed him to shatter a fallen captain just hours ago, began to hum in harmony with the sphere. It was like hearing a mother's heartbeat. It felt like safety. It felt like home. Without realizing it, hot tears began to stream down Deku's scarred, freckled cheeks. "It's beautiful," he choked out, quickly lifting a tattered sleeve to furiously wipe his eyes. "I don't know why I'm crying." "I'm sorry. Don't apologize," Aegis said gently. "Every guardian reacts that way the first time they see it. That's the traveler. It sacrificed itself to push back the darkness and save humanity, and with its dying breath, it created the ghosts. It created us, so we could find you. You are its champion now, Deku." Deku swallowed hard, looking at his scarred hands. Champion. The word carried a weight that terrified him, yet thrilled the deepest, most foundational parts of his soul. Whoever he was before he died, he knew with absolute certainty that this was what he was meant to do. He was meant to protect that city. "Coming in for approach at the tower," Aegis announced. "Welcome to the Vanguard, Guardian." The tower was a sensory overload of epic proportions. Built atop the very peak of the city's outer wall, it served as the headquarters, armory, and social hub for the Guardians. As Deku stepped off the transmat pad in the main courtyard, he nearly tripped over his own rusted boots as his brain tried to process everything at once. The air smelled of ozone, gun oil, and spicy ramen. Ships of all shapes and sizes, sleek, aerodynamic fighters, bulky, heavily armored gunships, and bizarre, alien-looking vessels, screamed overhead, constantly arriving and departing. But it was the people that made Deku's head spin. Guardians were everywhere. And they were nothing like him. He watched a massive, broad-shouldered man stride past, clad in armor plating so thick it looked like he was wearing a tank. The man had a giant, glowing red emblem of a lion on his chest. "A titan," Aegis whispered in Deku's ear. To his left, a slender woman wearing an elegant, sweeping trench coat and a helmet with a vertical glowing slit floated, literally hovered, a few inches off the ground, reading a holographic data pad. A warlock. Nearby, a group of agile, lithe figures with faces obscured by intricate cowls and long, flowing capes were showing off sleek hand cannons, laughing and tossing knives into the air that crackled with solar fire. Hunters. Deku's eyes were wide, darting from weapon to armor piece, from glowing subclass aura to exotic ship. His mind, wiped clean of its past, was desperately hungry for information. It was like a sponge thrown into an ocean. He didn't notice he had started doing it. The tensile strength of that Titan shoulder pauldron looks like a plasteel weave infused with spin metal, but the weight-to-mobility ratio seems highly inefficient unless the user is artificially enhancing their muscular output with light. But wait, if they channel arc energy through the localized joints, the kinetic friction would negate the weight. Deku?" Aegis interrupted, his shell spinning in confusion. "And that warlock over there," Deku continued, his voice dropping to a rapid, breathless whisper, completely ignoring his ghost. His eyes were locked on a warlock demonstrating a short-range teleport, blink, to a newly resurrected guardian. The spatial distortion implies a temporary traversal through a vacuum state. Void light? If you manipulate the gravity around your own mass, you could fold space. But the exit velocity would be zero, meaning momentum doesn't carry through the blink. Or does it? If I applied that to my own high-speed kicks, could I retain kinetic energy through a localized spatial warp? The impact force would be immense. I need a notebook. Aegis, do you have a notebook? Aegis blinked his single optic. Are you okay? Your heart rate is elevated, but your brainwave activity is spiking off the charts. You're talking at roughly 300 words a minute. Deku snapped out of his trance, his face flushing crimson. He slapped both hands over his mouth, looking around frantically to see if anyone was staring at him. A nearby hunter with a purple cape was indeed giving him a very strange look. Sorry! Deku squeaked, bowing apologetically to the confused hunter before whispering frantically to his ghost. I don't know what came over me. I just started looking at everything, and my brain just started running the numbers. It feels like a habit. A really, really old habit. Aegis chuckled, a pleasant, chiming sound. I think it's brilliant. Your analytical skills are going to keep you alive out there. Come on, We need to get you registered with the Vanguard. The commanders are waiting. Aegis led Deku through the bustling courtyard, past the crypt-arch tents where guardians were decrypting ancient engrams, and down a wide set of stairs into the Hall of Guardians. The Vanguard Hall was a long, solemn room lined with banners representing the 3 Guardian classes. At the far end stood a massive tactical map of the solar system, glowing with hundreds of holographic icons representing enemy movements, patrol zones, and strike operations. Standing around the table were 2 figures. The first was a towering awoken male with pale blue skin, glowing eyes, and a rigid, unyielding posture. He wore massive, asymmetrical armor with a sweeping white pauldron on his left shoulder. He exuded an aura of stoic, absolute authority. This was Commander Zavala, the Titan Vanguard. Beside him was a human woman with dark skin, a shaved head, and piercing, intelligent eyes. She wore elegant, purple and gold robes that seemed to ripple with a faint, underlying power. She radiated a calm, terrifying intellect. This was Ikora Rei, the Warlock Vanguard. As Deku approached, feeling incredibly small in his rusted rags, both commanders looked up from the tactical map. Ah, Zavala's deep, resonant voice echoed through the hall. It was a voice that commanded armies. The new arrival. Your ghost transmitted his initial report, though I admit, it made for unusual reading. Deku stopped a few feet away, standing at attention so stiffly he looked like a board. Sir. I mean Deku. Reborn and reporting for duty, sir. He threw a hasty, somewhat awkward salute. Zavala's stoic expression didn't crack, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of amusement. He stepped around the table, his heavy boots echoing on the marble floor, and looked down at the green-haired boy. At ease, Guardian, Zavala said gently. We do not stand on strict military ceremony here, though your respect is appreciated. I am Commander Zavala. This is Ikora Rei. Welcome to the tower, Deku, Ikora said, offering a warm, reassuring smile. Your ghost tells us you had quite the dramatic awakening. Waking up in the ruins of the Old East is dangerous enough, but fighting off a fallen patrol barehanded within minutes of your first breath? That is a feat worthy of the Iron Lords. I didn't really have a choice, ma'am. Deku rubbed the back of his neck nervously. They were going to hurt Aegis. I couldn't let them do that. My body just kind of moved on its own. Fascinating, Ikora mused, stepping closer. Aegis reported that you manifested arc light almost immediately, but not in the traditional manner of a striker titan. You didn't manifest a weapon of light, nor did you utilize a localized, full-body explosive charge. You directed the power-casual energy internally, through your nervous system and musculature, focusing it into extreme kinetic force in your extremities. A highly mobile, martial arts-based application. Deku nodded slowly. It felt natural. Like something I used to do a long time ago. I call it shoot style. Zavala crossed his arms. Guardians often retain subconscious muscle memories from their past lives. How to hold a gun, how to fight, how to survive. But the manipulation of the light is something that usually takes decades to master. To channel arc energy so precisely without formal training. Zavala looked at Ikora. He is raw, Ikora. Unrefined. A danger to himself as much as the enemy. All new light is raw, Zavala, Ikora countered smoothly. She looked back at Deku. Tell me, Deku. When you channeled the arc, what did you feel? Was it the storm? The desire to crash against your enemies like a thunderbolt? No, Deku answered instantly. Both commanders paused, surprised by the speed and certainty of his response. Deku closed his eyes, remembering the moment. Arc energy, it's volatile, right? It wants to expand. It wants to jump from point to point and release its tension. But if you let it expand wildly, you waste the kinetic potential. I didn't feel a storm. I felt a circuit. If you view the body as a closed power-causal loop, you can compress the arc light. By restricting its natural explosive expansion and binding it to the localized muscle fibers, you essentially create a bioelectric engine. The energy has nowhere to go but into the physical exertion. It's not a lightning strike. It's a localized, high-yield kinetic battery. Deku opened his eyes, realizing he was starting to mutter again, pulling an invisible data pad out of the air with his hands as he gestured wildly. I mean, theoretically, if I could synchronize the output across my entire body simultaneously, say, pushing it from a localized 5% output to a full 100%, the sheer kinetic force would allow for hypermobility. Bouncing off walls, altering trajectories midair. But the strain on the mortal frame, does light inherently reinforce bone density? If so, by what percentage? Because if it doesn't, 100% output would shatter my own limbs. But Aegis can heal me, right? So, wait, is the healing instant, or does it take time? If I shatter my arm mid-punch, will the momentum carry through before the bone fragments? Guardian, Zavala interrupted, his deep voice cutting through the rapid-fire monologue. Deku snapped his jaw shut, his face turning bright red again. I'm so sorry. I'm doing it again. I don't know why I do that. Zavala stared at the boy. For a long moment, the Titan vanguard was completely silent. He looked at Aegis. Ghost. Is your guardian malfunctioning? Not at all, Commander. Aegis chirped proudly. He's just very analytical. Ikora, however, was beaming. A genuine, bright smile had broken across her face. Not malfunctioning, Zavala. Theorizing. Brilliantly, I might add. He just casually deconstructed the thermodynamic properties of arc light and applied it to biomechanics without having read a single Vanguard textbook. He has the mind of a warlock trapped in a Titan's methodology. Ikora stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Deku's shoulder. Your mind is a gift, Deku. Do not apologize for it. We fight a war against enemies older than our solar system. Brute force will only get us so far. We need thinkers. We need tacticians. Zavala sighed, the sound like a mountain settling. Indeed. But a sharp mind is no substitute for armor. We cannot have you running into battle in ancient rags. Zavala tapped a command into the tactical table. I am authorizing a requisition order for standard issue Vanguard Titan plating and a basic weapon loadout. You will report to the armory, get outfitted, and rest. Tomorrow, I am assigning you to Lord Shaxx in the Crucible. We need to see what this shoot style can do in a controlled environment before we send you into the wild. Thank you, Commander, Deku said, bowing deeply. I won't let you down. See that you don't, Zavala said, his tone softening just a fraction. Welcome home, Guardian. An hour later, Deku stood on the wide, open-air balcony of the tower, completely transformed. The rusted rags were gone, incinerated in the Vanguard disposal units. In their place, he wore a newly forged suit of plasteel armor. The undersuit was a dark, flexible mesh designed to regulate temperature and channel light. Over it were heavy, angular armor plates covering his chest, shoulders, forearms, and shins. The armor had offered him standard Vanguard colors, red, blue, or gray. Deku had politely, but very firmly, asked if they had anything in green. After some grumbling, the frame had painted the plating a vibrant, deep emerald green, with stark white accents along the seams. He had even managed to convince the armorer to modify his helmet. Instead of a flat visor, the lower half of the faceplate featured a sweeping, metal curve that faintly resembled a wide, reassuring smile. Deku held the helmet under his arm, letting the high-altitude wind rustle his wild green hair. A heavy, reliable auto rifle, a Kvostov 7G02, was slung across his back, though he wasn't quite sure how to use it yet. He leaned against the railing, looking down. Behind him, the tower plaza was lively. A group of newly resurrected guardians, much like himself, were boasting to each other. I heard the Vanguard is offering a legendary rocket launcher if you clear a hive nest on the moon, one Titan bragged, flexing his arms. Forget that, I'm heading into the Crucible, a hunter laughed. I want glory. I want Shaxx to scream my name. I want the best loot in the city. They were talking about guns, about glory, about killing monsters. Deku listened to them, but he couldn't relate. He didn't feel the burning desire for a better gun. He didn't care about personal glory. He turned his gaze back down over the railing. Far below, shrouded in the safety of the massive walls, lay the civilian sectors of the last city. From up here, they looked like tiny fireflies. He couldn't see their faces, but he knew they were there. Ordinary people. Lightless people. Families huddled in apartments, workers in factories, children playing in the streets. People who lived every single day in the shadow of the wall, knowing that just beyond the concrete, an endless armada of alien gods, time-traveling machines, and undead nightmares were waiting to devour them. How terrified must they be? How heavy must the dread be, pressing down on their chests every time the alarm sounded? Deku closed his eyes, and the phantom pain returned. It was an ache deep in the center of his chest. It wasn't a physical wound. It was the echo of a burden he had carried in a life he couldn't remember. A memory flashed behind his eyelids. It was blurry, distorted by the static of amnesia. He saw a massive man with blonde hair, laughing uproariously, holding a child in his arms while standing amidst burning rubble. The man's smile was brighter than the sun. It was a smile that promised safety, a smile that said, "I am here." A symbol, Deku thought, the words floating up from his subconscious. A symbol of peace. He opened his eyes, looking down at the millions of lights in the city below. The guardians behind him were heroes. They fought the monsters. They pushed back the dark. But as Deku looked down, he realized that fighting wasn't enough. Not for him. Defeating the bad guys was only half the job. The other half was making sure the people you saved felt safe enough to sleep at night. They needed to see a hero coming and know, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were going to live. They needed a symbol. Deku gripped the metal railing, his knuckles turning white, the green plating of his gauntlets reflecting the ethereal glow of the traveler above. He didn't know his past. He didn't know if he had a mother, a father, or friends who missed him. He had woken up in a graveyard with nothing but a nameplate and a ghost. But as he stood there, feeling the immense, humming power of the light in his veins, he knew what his purpose was. He looked up at the massive white sphere in the sky. "You brought me back," Deku whispered to the traveler, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I don't know why you chose me. But I won't waste it. I promise you." He looked back down at the sprawling city, his green eyes burning with an unshakable, terrifying resolve. "I will protect them. All of them. And I'll do it with a smile." Aegis materialized beside him, his shell expanding gently. "It's a big job, Deku. The whole system is at war." Deku lifted his green helmet, sliding it over his head. The internal HUD booted up, painting the world in tactical readouts and soft blue light. He looked at his ghost through the smiling faceplate. "Then we better get to work." The muffled, concussive boom of a rocket launcher echoed through the thick metal walls of the Vanguard corridor, followed immediately by the booming, thunderous voice of Lord Shaxx. "Seventh column. I can't believe what I'm seeing." Izuku Deku Midoriya flinched, his shoulders hiking up to his ears. He stood just outside the massive, open threshold of the Crucible Handler's domain, clutching the strap of his auto rifle so tightly his knuckles beneath his green gauntlets were turning white. Is he always this loud?" Deku whispered down to Aegis, who was hovering by his waist. "Lord Shaxx?" "Oh yes," Aegis replied, his optics spinning cheerfully. "He is the Crucible. He's boisterous, passionate, and slightly terrifying, but there's no better mentor for combat in the entire solar system. He trained commanders of Allah, you know." Deku swallowed hard. He peered around the corner. Lord Shaxx was impossible to miss. He was a titan of monolithic proportions, clad in heavily scarred, fur-lined armor. One shoulder bore a massive, sweeping horn, while the other side was violently sheared off. He stood before an array of holographic monitors, broadcasting live feeds of guardians violently murdering each other across various maps in the solar system, screaming praises and tactical critiques at the top of his lungs. "Let me get this straight," Deku said, his voice wavering as he watched a warlock on a monitor get completely vaporized by a titan's flaming hammer. "The Vanguard wants me to train, by fighting other guardians, to the death." "Well, yes," Aegis said matter-of-factly. "Aegis. They're killing each other. Look at that guy, he just got shot with a localized black hole." Deku pointed frantically at a monitor where a hunter had just been consumed by a void nova bomb. "Deku, breathe," Aegis soothed, drifting up to meet his guardian's eye level. "It's a controlled environment. The Crucible is how guardians hone their light against the most dangerous opponents in the universe, each other. When a guardian dies in the Crucible, their ghost immediately resurrects them. It's a simulation of true combat, but without the finality. It builds reflexes, tactics, and camaraderie. But doesn't it hurt?" Deku asked, thinking back to the burning, agonizing pain he had felt just before his resurrection in the subway tunnel. Aegis paused. His shell drooped slightly. Yes. It hurts. Death always hurts. The pain is real, Deku. The crucible will test your tolerance for it. But you have to understand, out there in the wild, the Fallen, the Hive, the Vex, they won't hold back. If they destroy me, your death is permanent. Shax teaches you how to survive so that never happens. Deku looked down at his green plasteel boots. The phantom ache in his chest, the fading echo of 100 broken bones from a past life, throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Pain was an old friend, even if he couldn't remember its face. He clenched his fists, feeling the hum of arc light resting just beneath his skin, waiting for his command. He didn't want to hurt his fellow guardians. But he needed to get stronger. If he was going to be a symbol for the people of the city, he couldn't afford to be weak. Okay, Deku exhaled, his emerald eyes hardening with resolve. Okay. Let's do this. He stepped out from the corridor and approached the crucible handler. Lord Shax turned, sensing the new presence. Even beneath the horned, faceless helmet, Deku could feel the weight of the Titan's scrutiny. Shax looked the green-armored boy up and down, taking in the bright, cheerful paint job and the strange, smiling faceplate of Deku's helmet. Ah! Shax bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. The Vanguard's newest spark. Zavala sent me your files, rookie. He says you fought off a fallen raiding party within 3 minutes of your resurrection. Barehanded. Why yes, sir! Deku snapped to attention, saluting stiffly. It was an accident, mostly. I mean, instinct. Pure instinct, Lord Shax. Shax stepped forward, towering over Deku. He placed a massive, heavy hand on Deku's shoulder, nearly buckling the boy's knees. Instinct is the foundation of a true warrior. Zavala says you have a sharp mind. He says you channel the arc in a way he hasn't seen. But theory and instinct will only get you so far when a hunter has a sniper rifle aimed at your dome. Shax gestured to the monitors. The crucible is the forge, and you are the raw iron. Today, we see if you break, or if you bend. Are you ready to face your brothers and sisters, rookie? I am, sir. Deku said, his voice surprisingly steady. Good. Shax roared. I've slotted you into a skirmish match. 3-on-3. Light restriction protocols are lifted. I want to see this shoot style Zavala wrote about. Don't hold back, Guardian. If you show mercy in my arena, I will throw you out of the tower myself. Transmatting you to Bannerfall now. Before Deku could even say goodbye to Shax, a swirling vortex of white and blue light enveloped him. The sounds of the tower vanished, replaced by the rushing wind of transmat. Bannerfall. Tower Sector 4. Outer wall. Deku materialized in a flash of light on a wide, open-air balcony overlooking the last city. The map was a section of an abandoned tower, a mirror image of the one the Vanguard currently occupied, but heavily damaged from a past siege. Massive stone courtyards, tight maintenance corridors, and high vantage points created a complex, multi-tiered arena. Aegis materialized next to him, locking into his helmet's HUD. Matches starting in 10 seconds. Deku. Skirmish rules. First team to 50 kills wins. Work with your team. Deku looked to his left and right. Transmatting in beside him were his 2 randomly assigned teammates. On his left was a bulky Titan wearing heavily scarred, gunmetal gray armor, wielding a massive, drum-fed shotgun. He gave Deku a slow, evaluating nod. Stay behind my barricades, Greenhorn. Try not to bleed out too fast. On his right was an awoken hunter, a sleek, agile woman in purple armor, spinning a hand cannon around her finger with practiced ease. Just don't feed the enemy team kills, kid, she said, her voice laced with cynical amusement. Follow my lead. I'll flank, you guys draw fire? Understood. Deku said, nodding rapidly. I will do my best to support you. He pulled the Kvostov auto rifle off his back. It felt heavy, awkward, and entirely foreign in his hands. He knew the basic mechanics. Point, pull trigger, reload, but holding a firearm felt inherently wrong to him. It felt like trying to write with his non-dominant hand. Fight. Shax's voice boomed from unseen speakers across the arena. The gray Titan immediately lunged forward, sprinting down the central corridor toward the open courtyard. The hunter vanished into a side alley, initiating a cloaking protocol that rendered her nearly invisible. Deku took a deep breath and followed the Titan, keeping his rifle raised. They burst into the central courtyard, a large, open area divided by a massive, destroyed tree. Almost instantly, the air was filled with the deafening crack of weapons fire. Ping! Ping! 2 high-caliber rounds sparked off the Titan's shoulder plating. Sniper! High balcony, 2 o'clock! The Titan roared, sliding on his knees and slamming his fists into the ground. A towering, translucent wall of void light erupted from the stone, forming a towering barricade. Deku dove behind the shield, his heart hammering against his ribs. He peeked around the edge of the void wall. Across the courtyard, elevated on a balcony, was an enemy hunter, the glint of a sniper rifle scope shining ominously. On the ground level, pushing aggressively toward them, were an enemy warlock and Titan. "I'll lay down suppressing fire," Deku shouted over the gunfire. He leaned out from the barricade, raised his Kvastov, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil was jarring. The bullets sprayed in a wide, uncontrollable arc, chewing into the stone walls, the dead tree, and the sky, missing the advancing warlock by a full 3 feet. "Control your spread," the great Titan yelled, drawing his shotgun as the enemy warlock closed the distance. Deku gritted his teeth, trying to wrestle the gun under control. He was so focused on aiming that he completely forgot to check his peripherals. He never even saw the enemy Titan flanking from the right side. There was a rush of wind, the crackle of arc energy, and then a devastating, concussive impact on the side of Deku's ribs. The enemy Titan had engaged a shoulder charge. The sheer force of the blow shattered Deku's right side. His plasteel armor cracked like an eggshell. His ribs splintered, driving inward, piercing his lung. The world spun violently as he was launched backward, crashing into the stone wall of the courtyard. Deku gasped, a spray of blood painting the inside of his smiling faceplate. The pain was instantaneous, blinding, and absolute. It felt like being hit by a speeding train. His vision tunneled into a pinpoint of blackness. He didn't even have time to scream before his heart stopped. Gasp! Deku's eyes snapped open. He was on his hands and knees, violently sucking in air. The pain was completely gone, replaced by a cold, lingering shock. He was back at the initial spawn point. Aegis hovered directly in front of him. His shell expanded. You're okay, Aegis said quickly. "You died. I brought you back." Deku touched his ribs. The armor was perfectly intact. The bone was whole. But his mind remembered the impact. He remembered the sickening crunch. He began to hyperventilate, panic clawing at his throat. "I died. I actually died. The pain, it was real. Your teammate is down. Fight back." Shax's voice roared from the heavens. Deku looked at his HUD. Both the Grey Titan and the Purple Hunter had red X marks over their icons. His team had been wiped. "Deku," Aegis said gently, lowering himself to eye level. "I told you it would hurt. But you are immortal as long as I am here. You have to push past the shock. You have to fight." Deku closed his eyes. He focused on his breathing. Inhale. Exhale. He thought about the civilian sectors below the wall. He thought about the red sky and his missing memories. He thought about the feeling of helplessness. If I can't handle a shoulder charge from a training partner, Deku thought, his fists clenching, how am I supposed to protect anyone from real monsters? He opened his eyes. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifyingly sharp focus. The warlock part of his mind, the analytical engine that never stopped running, booted up into overdrive. He looked at the Kvastov auto rifle lying on the ground. Guns require a line of sight. They require a stable firing stance. They restrict mobility. My enemies are using traditional vanguard tactics. Titans build walls and charge in straight lines. Warlocks hover and rely on area denial. Hunters use verticality and stealth. Deku left the gun on the floor. "Aegis," Deku murmured, his voice deadly serious. "I need you to monitor my bone density. If I exceed structural tolerance, prep localized healing protocols on my joints." Aegis blinked. "Wait, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to stop playing by their rules," Deku said. He closed his eyes and looked inward. He found the storm. The dormant reservoir of arc light resting in his core. He didn't just summon a spark, he reached in and grabbed the storm with both hands, full cowling. He visualized his circulatory system. He visualized every nerve, every muscle fiber. He pumped the raw, crackling paracausal energy directly into his biology. He restricted the outward explosion of the arc, forcing it to compress, looping it through his body in a continuous, high-yield circuit. BZZZT. Deku's eyes snapped open, glowing with a blinding, incandescent blue-white light. Deep green lightning erupted from his body, crawling over his plasteel armor, sparking and snapping in the air around him. The stone beneath his boots cracked from the sheer pressure of his localized gravity. "Let's go," Deku whispered. He pushed off his back foot. He didn't run. He vanished. The kinetic force of his dash was so violent it left a localized sonic boom at the spawn point. He crossed the 50-yard distance back to the central courtyard in a fraction of a second. The enemy team was grouped up near the heavy ammo crate in the center. The warlock was floating slightly, casting a healing rift. The Titan was deploying a fresh barricade. The hunter was scanning the lanes with her sniper. They saw a flash of green lightning. "Contact!" The enemy Titan shouted, raising his auto rifle. "He doesn't have a weapon!" Deku was moving at 70 miles per hour. He didn't charge straight at the barricade. Instead, he channeled the arc into his legs, stomped hard onto the courtyard pavement, and launched himself vertically into the air, leaping 20 feet high. Enemy Titan is shielded from the front. Warlock is providing overshields. Hunter is acquiring target lock. Deku's mind processed the battlefield in a millisecond. At the apex of his jump, Deku twisted his body. He kicked off the side of the massive stone wall of the courtyard. The stone shattered under his boot, altering his trajectory in midair. He rebounded like a pinball, shooting horizontally across the open space, completely bypassing the Titan's front-facing barricade. "What the?" The enemy warlock gasped, tracking the erratic green streak of light. Deku descended behind their lines. He landed with a heavy thud, his momentum carrying him into a slide. Before the warlock could even turn, Deku sprang from the slide, spinning 360 degrees, and delivered a devastating, arc-infused roundhouse kick directly to the side of the warlock's helmet. Crack! The warlock's shield shattered instantly in a burst of white light. The physical impact sent the warlock spinning through the air like a ragdoll, crashing into a pillar and dissolving into a ghost state. "Ha ha! Excellent strike!" Shax roared over the comms. "What do you call that? I've never seen a Titan kick." The enemy hunter reacted with terrifying speed. She dropped the sniper, drew a hand cannon, and fired 3 rapid shots at Deku. Deku didn't dodge away, he dodged forward. He ducked under the first shot, swayed past the second, and caught the barrel of the hand cannon on the third, pushing it upward. The shot rang out, blowing a hole in the canopy above. With his left hand holding the gun away, Deku planted his left foot and drove his right knee squarely into the hunter's sternum. The arc energy compressed in his knee released in a localized shockwave, completely collapsing the hunter's chest cavity and sending her flying backward into a wall, dead before she hit the ground. 2 down. The enemy Titan roared in fury, dropping his rifle and drawing a massive, 2-handed sword pulsing with void energy. He abandoned his barricade and charged Deku, swinging the heavy blade in a wide, decapitating arc. Deku ducked underneath the heavy swing, feeling the cold chill of the void pass inches over his scalp. He stepped inside the Titan's guard, grabbing the Titan's wrists with both hands. Even with the light, the enemy Titan was massive, easily outweighing Deku by 100 pounds. But Deku wasn't relying on mass. He was relying on physics. He dropped to his back, pulling the Titan forward while simultaneously planting his right foot squarely in the center of the Titan's chest plate. Using the Titan's own forward momentum and his arc-enhanced leg strength, Deku launched the Titan over his head in a flawless, bone-shattering sacrifice throw. The Titan soared through the air, crashing headfirst into the stone courtyard. Deku kicked up to his feet in a flash of green lightning, standing over the stunned Titan. He pulled back his right fist, the arc light coalescing into a blinding, humming sphere of kinetic energy. Detroit. Before he could throw the punch, a deafening horn sounded across the map. A flawless engagement. Incredible display of light, Shax bellowed. I don't know what you're feeding your ghosts, rookie, but I want some of it. The match timer appeared on Deku's HUD. The skirmish was a blowout, but Deku's triple kill had secured a massive point swing. As the match progressed, word spread rapidly through the enemy comms. They stopped treating the unarmed rookie like a joke. They began coordinating, using suppression grenades to lock down his light, setting up crossfires, and utilizing their supers. Deku died. He died a lot. He took a golden gun shot to the chest that incinerated his heart. Aegis brought him back. He was crushed by a Nova bomb that atomized his armor. Aegis brought him back. He was electrocuted by a Stormcaller's trance. Aegis brought him back. Every death was agonizing. Every death tested his resolve. But with every death, his warlock mind gathered data. He learned the timing of a hunter's dodge. He learned the exact radius of a warlock's rift. He learned how to predict a titan's slam based on the shifting of their center of mass. He didn't just fight, he evolved. The match was nearing its end. The score was 48-49. The enemy team was in the lead. Next kill wins. Deku's two teammates, the Grey Titan and the Purple Hunter, were currently locked down, their ghosts suppressed by a lingering tether in the lower corridors. Deku was alone in the central courtyard, heavy ammo inbound, Aegis warned in his ear. Deku, they have rockets. Deku stood in the center of the courtyard, breathing heavily. His green armor was cracked, scorched, and covered in his own dried blood. His muscles screamed in protest, the constant channeling of 20% arcowling pushing his new biology to its absolute limit. Across the courtyard, the entire enemy team emerged from the upper balcony. They weren't taking chances. The Titan hoisted a Wardcliffe coil rocket launcher. The Hunter drew a solar bow. The Warlock hovered, preparing a dawn blade. 3-on-1. Surrender, rookie, the enemy Warlock called out across the courtyard. You fought well, but it's over. Deku lowered his head. His green hair, damp with sweat, fell over his smiling faceplate. I can't reach them, Deku calculated. The distance is too great. If I jump, the rockets will track me. If I charge, the dawn blade will incinerate me. If I dodge, the bow will pin me. There is no safe route. A memory flickered in his mind. A man with a scar on his face, wearing a white suit, looking at him with disappointment. A hero doesn't look for the safe route. A hero makes one. Deku planted his feet. He spread his stance wide, digging the iron soles of his boots into the cracked stone. Aegis, Deku said, his voice eerily calm. I need you to bypass my biological limiters. Give me everything the Traveler has. Deku, if you channel that much arc energy internally without venting it, you'll vaporize your own bones. Aegis warned, his optics shrinking in panic. Just do it! Deku yelled. Aegis pulsed. A massive, unregulated surge of pure paracausal light flooded from the ghost into Deku's core. Deku screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a roar of absolute, unrestrained exertion. The green lightning wrapping his body didn't just crackle, it exploded. It formed a localized tornado of glowing, emerald energy that roared into the sky, tearing the dead tree in the courtyard out by its roots. The stone beneath his feet liquefied from the sheer thermal runoff of his compressed kinetic force. He pushed it to 50%, then 80%, then 100%. The enemy team stared in horror at the pillar of green light. Fire! Fire! The enemy Titan screamed, pulling the trigger on the Wardcliffe coil. A swarm of erratic, shrieking rockets launched into the air, spiraling down toward Deku. The Warlock hurled a wave of solar fire. The Hunter loosed a flaming arrow. Deku didn't run. He bent his knees, 1,000,000%. He kicked off the ground. The sonic boom shattered every pane of glass within a half-mile radius of the arena. The kinetic launch was so violent that the recoil created a crater 10 feet deep where he had been standing. Deku shot straight up into the air, a green comet ascending to the heavens. The swarm of rockets, the solar wave, and the arrow all converged on the spot he had just vacated, resulting in a massive, useless explosion. High above the courtyard, suspended in the sky for a single, breathless microsecond, Deku looked down at the enemy team. He pulled back his right arm. He didn't just channel arc light. He channeled the phantom weight of a legacy he couldn't remember. He channeled the desire to save, the need to protect, and the absolute refusal to lose. The arc light compressed into his fist until it was a singularity of blue and green gravity. He twisted his body and threw the punch directly at the ground. He wasn't aiming at a person. He was aiming at the map itself. Delaware. Deku roared, the forgotten name tearing from his throat. Smash! The punch didn't just hit the air. It hit the physical atmosphere with enough force to change the localized weather. A shockwave of compressed, paracausal wind and arc lightning erupted from his fist. It looked like a translucent meteor plummeting toward the earth. The blast wave struck the center of the courtyard. The impact was cataclysmic. The stone balcony the enemy team was standing on didn't just break, it atomized. The sheer kinetic pressure flattened the Titan, the Warlock, and the Hunter instantly, crushing their armor, shattering their shields, and reducing them to ghost states before they even realized what hit them. The shockwave continued to ripple outward, tearing up the courtyard, blasting through the stone walls, and sending a wave of dust and debris washing over the entire map. And then silence. Deku plummeted back to Earth, landing heavily in the center of the massive, smoking crater he had just created. His right arm was completely shattered, hanging limply at his side. His green armor was charred black. He fell to his knees, gasping for air, the green lightning fizzling out completely. For 10 seconds the comms were dead silent. Then, the speakers crackled. Lord Shaxx didn't yell. Lord Shaxx didn't scream. For the first time in perhaps a century, Lord Shaxx spoke in a hushed, trembling whisper of pure, unadulterated awe. What was that? The match timer hit 0. Victory. 2 hours later, Deku stood in the tower armory. He was out of his armor, wearing only the black, flexible Vanguard undersuit. His right arm was wrapped in a glowing, stasis-infused medical brace, courtesy of a very stern tower medic. Aegis had healed the bones, but the localized tissue damage from channeling 100% of his light internally required actual rest to fully repair. Before him on the workbench lay the ruined pieces of his green plasteel armor. The right gauntlet was completely melted. The boots were cracked in half. The gruff frame, a robotic Vanguard assistant, working the armory, crossed its mechanical arms. Guardian, you put this armor through localized kinetic stress testing that exceeds the output of a Cabal drop pod. Plasteel isn't designed to handle this kind of internal pressure. You need something heavier. Let me issue you some iron banner plate. Thicker. Bulkier. Deku shook his head, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight. No. If I wear heavier armor, it'll restrict my mobility. I need to be fast. The armor just needs to be smarter. Deku picked up a datapad with his good hand, quickly sketching out a schematic. The Warlock brain was running again. Instead of making the whole suit thicker, we reinforced the focal points of kinetic transfer, Deku muttered rapidly, showing the pad to the confused frame. I need you to lace the shin guards and the forearms with a spin metal weave. But for the boots, I want you to forge the soles out of solid, compressed relic iron. Make them heavy. Give them impact dampeners. If I'm going to channel the arc into kicks, I need a surface that can absorb and reflect the recoil without shattering. The frame analyzed the schematic. Adding solid iron soles will alter your center of gravity drastically. You'll walk like a heavily encumbered Cabal. I won't be walking, Deku smiled faintly. I'll be bouncing, the frame shrugged. Your funeral, Lightbearer. I'll have the modifications done by tomorrow. And keep the color, Deku added. Bright green. White accents. The frame took the ruined armor and walked into the back forge. Aegis floated down, landing gently on the workbench. You know, tactically speaking, bright green is an awful color for camouflage. Especially when you combine it with that faceplate. Deku reached over to the bench, picking up his helmet. Miraculously, the helmet had survived the blast intact. The sweeping, metal curve of the smiling mouth gleamed under the armory lights. Deku stared at the smile. He traced it with his thumb. In the match today, Deku said quietly, when I was dying, when I was scared. I realized something. Aegis tilted his shell, listening. A guardian's job is terrifying, Deku continued. We die over and over again. We fight nightmares. But the people down there in the city? They don't have ghosts. They die once, and they're gone. If they see a guardian coming in dark, scary armor, sneaking in the shadows, hiding, they'll think the guardian is scared, too. Deku lifted the helmet, looking directly into the dark visor. I don't want to hide, Deku said, his voice firm, echoing with an ancient, unbreakable conviction. If I wear bright colors, the enemies will target me instead of them. And when the people see me coming, when they see this smile, they'll know that everything is going to be fine. He placed the helmet back on the bench. Because I am here. Aegis looked at his guardian. The ghost had searched for centuries for a warrior. He thought he had found a titan, but as he looked at the green-haired boy, with his shattered arm, his bright smile, and a heart so massive it seemed to eclipse the traveler itself, Aegis realized he had found something much, much rarer. He had found a hero. The tower hangar was a cavernous amphitheater of organized chaos. The air was thick with the scent of burning promethium fuel, industrial solvent, and the sharp tang of ozone. Massive shipyard frames and maintenance drones buzzed through the air like angry metal insects, welding and repairing the battered hulls of Guardian jump ships returning from the frontier. Izuku Deku Midoriya stood awkwardly near loading bay 4, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His new armor felt different. The chest piece, shoulders, and gauntlets were still the bright, vibrant green plasteel he had requested, accented with stark white lines. But his boots were entirely new. Forged from compressed relic iron by a disgruntled tower frame, the massive, heavy-duty soles clanked against the metal grating of the hangar floor with every tiny movement. They felt like solid blocks of lead. Without channeling his light, merely lifting his leg required conscious, strenuous effort. Stop fidgeting, Deku. You look like a nervous thrall, Aegis chimed, hovering near his right shoulder. I can't help it, Deku muttered, his warlock brain already firing on all cylinders. Zavala said this is a Vanguard-mandated strike team. I'm being paired with veterans. What if my combat style doesn't synergize with theirs? What if my bright armor compromises their stealth protocols? The acoustic resonance of these relic iron boots alone generates a decibel level that will alert any Cabal patrol within a half-mile radius unless I maintain a constant, low-level arc field to dampen the kinetic impact against the ground. Breathe, Guardian, Aegis interrupted softly. You survived the Crucible. You blew up a Crucible map, actually. Shax is still complaining about the requisition forms for the masonry. You are going to be fine. Here they come. Deku snapped his jaw shut and stood at attention as two figures approached through the hangar mist. The first was an awoken male. He moved with a terrifyingly graceful, gliding stride, as if gravity only applied to him when he allowed it. He wore a sweeping, deep violet trench coat over sleek, obsidian armor. His face was a pale, luminescent blue, his features sharp and aristocratic, framed by slicked-back white hair. His glowing, pale eyes scanned Deku with an expression of profound, unfiltered disdain. A warlock. Beside him, practically bouncing with restless energy, was an exo. The mechanical man had a chassis of scratched, gunmetal gray, splashed with faded orange paint. A massive, jagged horn protruded from the left side of his faceplate, while his optic sensors glowed a fierce, fiery yellow. He wore a ragged, tan cloak over lightweight hunter armor, a heavy hand cannon slung low on his right hip like an old-world gunslinger. The awoken warlock stopped a few feet away, folding his arms. He looked at Deku's bright green armor, lingering on the smiling faceplate of the helmet resting under the boy's arm. Tell me this is a joke, the warlock said. His voice was smooth, cold, and dripping with condescension. Zavala, please tell me the commander's comms are malfunctioning. This is the miracle rookie? He looks like a radioactive traffic cone. The exo barked a harsh, metallic laugh. Traffic cone? That's good, Kale. But hey, give the kid some credit. I heard Shaq screaming about him yesterday. Word in the bazaar is this kid punched a hole through the Bannerfall courtyard. Rumors, JX, Kale replied without looking at his partner. Exaggerations by bored titans. I rely on empirical data, and empirically, I see a light bearer who hasn't been alive for more than 72 hours, wearing colors that will ensure every Cabal sniper from here to the EDZ uses him for target practice. Deku swallowed hard. He stepped forward and bowed slightly, a remnant of his past life's politeness. I am Deku. It is an honor to meet you both. I promise to do my absolute best not to drag the team down. Kale stared at him. You bow? What are you, a relic from the Golden Age? Leave him alone, Kale, JX7 said, stepping forward and clapping a heavy, metallic hand on Deku's shoulder. The Exo leaned in, his optical sensors whirring. Name's JX7, kid? Hunter Vanguard. I shoot things, I look good doing it, and I get paid in glimmer. That ray of sunshine over there is Kale. He's a void walker. He reads too many books and complains about my flying. Welcome to Fireteam Loot Gremlins. We are not calling the fireteam that, Kale snapped, pinching the bridge of his nose. And we are wasting time. Zavala wants the Cabal excavation in the European Dead Zone shut down before they unearth whatever Golden Age tech is buried in the salt mines. Ship. Now. Kale turned on his heel and strode toward a sleek black and purple stealth ship. JX7 nudged Deku. Don't mind him. He's just grumpy because Ikora didn't let him bring his favorite book on the mission. Let's go punch some space rhinos. Deku smiled nervously, donning his helmet. The green and white smiling visor slid into place, the HUD booting up. He clanked heavily after the two veterans, his mind racing with possibilities, anxieties, and a desperate desire to prove himself. The flight to the European Dead Zone took less than 20 minutes via endless drive, but the atmosphere inside the jump ship felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Deku sat in the cramped passenger hold, frantically reviewing the mission files on his holographic datapad. He was muttering under his breath, his warlock brain dissecting everything. Red Legion remnants. Heavy infantry. Phalanx shield units utilize a localized energy projection, meaning kinetic impact is less effective than energy-based suppression, unless the kinetic impact exceeds the shield's structural threshold. If I apply 15% arc cowling to a localized point, say, a heel drop, I could shatter the projector itself. But then there are the Colossus units, heavy rotary cannons, rocket pods, high durability. I need to maintain extreme mobility to avoid target lock. Across the hold, Kale was meditating, floating a few inches off his seat with his legs crossed, eyes closed. A faint, violet aura of void light hummed around him. His brow twitched in annoyance at Deku's incessant whispering. JX7, meanwhile, was meticulously polishing his hand cannon, humming an upbeat tune. He looked up, his yellow eyes spinning. Hey kid! You're gonna burn out your optics staring at that datapad, JX said. It's just Cabal. They're big, they're loud, and they blow up real nice when you shoot the pressurized gel tanks on their backs. Simple. Deku looked up, his warlock mind unable to accept the oversimplification. But it's not simple, JX. The Cabal military doctrine relies on overwhelming logistical support and overlapping fields of fire. They don't just shoot. They use phalanxes to create an impenetrable frontline, psions to provide long-range psychic suppression and sniper fire, and legionaries to flank. If we just rush in, we'll be caught in a crossfire. Kale opened one eye. The glowing blue iris fixed on Deku. Oh? The rookie reads tactics. How quaint. Tell me, Deku, how does a Titan plan to bypass an overlapping field of Cabal fire? Deku hesitated, feeling the weight of the warlock's judgment. Well, traditional Titan doctrine would dictate a ward of dawn or a towering barricade to establish a foothold. But I don't use void or solar, and my arc light doesn't manifest as a frontal shield. So you're useless in a siege, Kale stated flatly. Hey! Aegis materialized, floating defensively in front of Deku. My guardian is not useless. I didn't say he was useless, Kale corrected, floating back down into his seat. I said he is useless in a siege. Cabal are a siege-based military. If you cannot hold ground, and you cannot absorb fire, you become a liability. Deku felt a flash of frustration, but he quickly pushed it down. Kale wasn't entirely wrong. In his warlock-esque analysis of his own abilities, Deku knew his shoot style was entirely offensive and mobility-based. He couldn't protect his teammates with walls of light. He had to protect them by destroying the threat before it could hurt them. I'll be fast, Deku said quietly, gripping the edge of his datapad. If I move faster than their targeting computers can track, I can break their lines from the inside. I won't be a liability, Kale. I promise. Kale huffed, adjusting the collar of his robes. Promises don't stop Cabal's slug rifles, rookie. Just stay behind me and don't get in my way. Approaching drop coordinates, the ship's AI chimed. Trostland outskirts. Atmospheric conditions, heavy rain, high humidity. Alright boys, showtime, JX7 cheered, holstering his hand cannon with a stylish twirl. Let's go get some loot. The floor of the dropship opened beneath them. Deku felt the sudden, exhilarating rush of freefall. The three guardians dropped through the thick, gray clouds of the EDZ, hurtling toward the earth below. Through the rain and the wind, Deku saw the ruined landscape of Trostland rushing up to meet him. It was a sprawling graveyard of Golden Age Europe, crumbling Gothic cathedrals, rusted-out husks of cars lining fractured highways, and dense, overgrown pine forests that had swallowed entire towns. In the distance, the colossal, glowing shard of the Traveler jutted out of the dark forest like a jagged, crystalline mountain. 30 seconds to impact. Kale, falling gracefully with his arms crossed, suddenly erupted in purple light. He engaged a blink, tearing a hole in space and teleporting the last 100 feet, touching down softly on the roof of a ruined church without making a sound. JX7 hooped, spinning in midair. He fired his jump jets at the last possible second, double jumping just above the ground and landing in a crouch, his cape billowing behind him. Deku, however, plummeted like a stone. The relic iron boots dragged him down faster than the others. Deku, brake! Aegis yelled in his ear. Deku didn't use jump jets. He closed his eyes, visualizing the circuit. Arc cowling, 5%. Green lightning flared around his body. Just before he hit the asphalt of the ruined highway, he channeled the energy into his heavy boots and performed a mid-air somersault. He slammed both iron soles into the ground. Crack! The impact shattered the ancient asphalt, sending chunks of rock flying in all directions, creating a small crater. Deku crouched in the center, steam rising from his green armor, the green lightning fizzling out. He stood up, shaking out his legs. Landed. Kale looked down from the church roof, unimpressed. Loud. Unsubtle. And you've undoubtedly alerted any patrols within a mile. Perfect. It was a kinetic displacement landing. Deku defended himself, looking up. I can't float like you. Quiet, Kale snapped, holding up a hand. Deku instantly fell silent. Even JX stopped spinning his gun. From the dense, fog-choked forest ahead of them came a sound that made the ground vibrate. It was a heavy, rhythmic thudding. The sound of massive, mechanized boots marching in unison, accompanied by the deep, guttural barks of an alien tongue. Contact, JX whispered, his yellow eyes narrowing. Scout patrol. Looks like they're heading back to the main excavation site. Kale dropped down from the roof, his coat flaring. We don't engage. The mission is to destroy the drill. If we fight the patrol, they'll radio ahead and reinforce the site. Agreed, Deku whispered, moving into the shadows of a rusted truck. Stealth approach. But JX7 let out a metallic sigh. Oh, come on. Look at them. They're practically begging to be shot. Through the trees, a squad of Cabal emerged. 4 legionaries, massive, hulking brutes in thick red and white armor, carrying heavy slug rifles, and 2 phalanxes, holding massive, heavy shields that projected impenetrable blue energy barriers. Before Kale could issue an order, JX7 drew a glowing, serrated throwing knife from his belt. Watch and learn, rookie. JX, no. Kale hissed. JX threw the knife. It arced through the rain, perfectly threading the needle between the 2 phalanx shields, and buried itself directly into the pressurized gel tank on the back of a legionary. There was a half-second hiss of escaping gas, followed by a massive, fiery explosion. The legionary detonated, taking out the one next to it. The entire patrol spun around, roaring in anger, raising their weapons toward the rusted truck. Well, so much for stealth, JX chuckled, drawing his hand cannon. Have at 'em, boys. Kale let out a string of awoken curses. You insufferable machine! I'm going to turn you into a toaster. The warlock stepped out of cover, raising his hand. A sphere of swirling, concentrated void energy formed in his palm. He hurled it forward like a bowling ball. The Axion bolt struck the ground in front of the phalanxes, detonating and sending tracking seekers of void light that bypassed the shields and disintegrated the 2 remaining legionaries into purple ash. The 2 phalanxes, however, stood firm. Their shields absorbed the blast, and they began to advance, firing their slug rifles in heavy, suppressive bursts. Deku was analyzing the situation from behind the truck. Slug rifles have a slow rate of fire but massive kinetic impact. Phalanx shields are impenetrable from the front. Kale's grenade is on cooldown. JX is reloading. Cover me! Deku yelled, bursting out from behind the truck. Kale groaned. The Titan is charging the shields. Of course he is. Say goodbye to your ghost, rookie. But Deku didn't charge straight at them. He activated his arc cowling, just 10%. The green lightning danced across his armor. He sprinted at an angle, flanking to the right. The phalanxes turned to track him, their heavy shields pivoting. That was all Deku needed. By forcing them to turn, he exposed their flanks to his warlock. Kale, now! Deku shouted over the gunfire. Kale, despite his annoyance, was a veteran. He instantly recognized the tactical opening. He raised his hand, firing a burst from his pulse rifle directly into the exposed, unshielded flank of the right phalanx. The Cabal roared, staggering sideways. Deku didn't stop moving. As the right phalanx stumbled, its shield projector flickered. Deku channeled 20% into his heavy iron boots. He leaped off a rusted car hood, launching himself into the air. He spun, delivering a devastating, arc-infused axe kick directly onto the top edge of the phalanx's shield. The relic iron soul collided with the energy projector. The kinetic force, amplified by the arc light, was astronomical. The shield didn't just break, the entire physical metal apparatus buckled in half. The phalanx's arms snapped under the pressure, and the Cabal collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Deku landed smoothly, instantly dropping into a low sweep that knocked the legs out from under the second phalanx. Before the massive alien could hit the ground, JX-7 was there. The Exo slid in, his hand cannon barking 3 times. The phalanx went limp. Silence descended on the highway, save for the patter of rain. Deku stood up, breathing heavily, the green lightning receding. He looked at Kale, waiting for the reprimand. The awoken warlock stared at the crushed Cabal shield, then at Deku's boots. His glowing eyes narrowed. You used yourself as a distraction to alter their facing. You didn't try to brute force the shield. You targeted the projector housing. And you did it in under 4 seconds. I analyzed their pivot speed, Deku said, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. They're heavy. They turn slowly. It seemed like the most logical approach. Kale looked at JX, who was spinning his gun with a smug expression. He's smarter than you, JX. Most rocks are smarter than me. Kale, that's why I'm a hunter, JX laughed, slapping Deku on the back. Nice kick, kid! Now let's go blow up a drill before they send the big boys. Kale didn't praise Deku, but he didn't insult him either. He just turned and began walking down the highway. Keep moving. We have 2 miles to the excavation site. And JX, if you throw another knife without my order, I will feed you to a thrall. The Cabal excavation site was a monument to industrial brutality. The 3 guardians lay on their bellies on a high ridge overlooking a massive, sunken quarry. The forest had been completely clear-cut, the earth scorched and dug out by Cabal strip miners. In the center of the massive crater stood the drill, a towering, multi-story machine that looked like a mechanical monolith, plunging a massive, spinning bit deep into the crust of the EDZ. The noise was deafening. The ground shook with a continuous, rhythmic earthquake. But it wasn't the drill that made Deku's stomach drop. It was the army guarding it. Traveler's light, JX whistled softly, lowering his sniper rifle scope. That's a lot of angry rhinos. The quarry was swarming with Red Legion. Dozens of legionaries patrolled the perimeter. Phalanxes guarded the ramparts. Psions, smaller, more agile Cabal with psychic abilities, were perched on the high scaffolding of the drill, clutching long-range wire rifles. And at the base of the drill stood the commander. A colossus. It was nearly twice the size of a normal Cabal, clad in thick, golden-accented heavy armor. On its back was a massive rack of micro-missiles, and in its hands, it carried a heavy rotary slug launcher, a minigun that fired rounds the size of soda cans. A standard frontal assault is suicide, Kale said, his voice flat, his warlock mind calculating probabilities. There is no cover in the quarry. The Psions have the high ground. If we push, the Colossus will suppress us, and the phalanxes will close the net. We need a distraction, something to draw them away from the drill so I can plant the explosive charges on the primary coolant lines. JX grinned. I can be a distraction. Just point me at M. You would last 3 seconds under rotary fire, JX, Kale shot back. Deku lay there, his green helmet resting in the mud, staring down at the base. He wasn't looking at the Cabal. He was looking at the sky above the quarry. They don't have enough troops down there, Deku muttered, his voice barely audible. Kale frowned, looking at him. Are you malfunctioning, rookie? There are at least 60 hostiles down there. No, look at the scale of the drill, Deku said, pulling up his datapad, his fingers flying across the holographic screen. The Red Legion operates on a rigid command structure. For a high-value excavation like this, Vanguard files say they typically deploy a full century, 100 units. There are only 60 down there. That means 40 are unaccounted for. Maybe they're on lunch break, JX joked. They're in orbit, Deku said, his eyes wide behind his visor. Cabal tactical doctrine dictates orbital reinforcements to trap attackers. If we attack the drill, we won't just be fighting the 60 on the ground. They'll drop the remaining 40 directly on our heads. Kale's glowing eyes widened slightly. He looked up at the gray clouds. Cabal drop pods, massive, heavy spheres of metal that plummeted from space like meteors, were notoriously deadly. If they landed on a Guardian, it was an instant, crushing death. He's right, Kale breathed. It's an ambush waiting to happen. The moment we engage, the command ship in orbit will target our light signatures and drop the pods directly on our positions. So we can't attack? JX asked, sounding severely disappointed. We can, Deku said, a strange, intense warlock fire lighting up his warlock brain. We just have to use their math against them. Deku crawled back from the ridge, sitting up and projecting a holographic map of the quarry from his ghost. Aegis, Deku said, can you hack the Cabal local telemetry and pull their drop pod trajectory algorithms? I'm a ghost, Deku, Aegis said proudly. Hacking Cabal tech is like picking a lock with a sledgehammer. Give me 5 seconds. A moment later, the map lit up with a dozen red circles scattered across the quarry floor. Got it. These are their pre-programmed reinforcement drop zones. Perfect, Deku said, pointing rapidly at the map. Kale, you said you need a distraction to plant the charges on the drill. Yes, Kale said, leaning in, surprisingly captivated by the rookie's tactical acumen. JX, Deku looked at the hunter. You want to shoot things. Always, JX confirmed. Okay. Here is the plan. Deku took a deep breath, the warlock brain and the titan heart merging into something entirely new. We don't avoid the drop pods. We trigger them on purpose. JX, you take position on the western ridge. You start sniping the Psions on the scaffolding. Make as much noise as possible. Draw the aggro of the Colossus. I like it so far, JX grinned. When the Colossus realizes it can't hit JX through the cover of the ridge, it will call for orbital reinforcement, Deku continued, tapping the red circles on the map. The drop pods take exactly 8.4 seconds from atmospheric entry to impact. I will be down in the quarry. I will run a specific, mathematically predetermined route through these drop zones. Kale stared at him in horror. Are you insane? You want to play tag with orbital meteors? Not tag. Billiards, Deku smiled beneath his helmet. When the pods come down, the Cabal infantry on the ground will clear the blast radii to avoid friendly fire. That will break their phalanx lines. In the chaos, Kale, you use blink to bypass the scattered infantry, get to the drill, plant the charges, and get out. And what about you? Kale demanded. The targeting systems will track your light. The pods will follow you. If you miscalculate by a half second, you will be reduced to a red stain under 10 tons of space metal. Deku looked at his relic iron boots. He remembered the feeling of 100% arc cowling in the Crucible. He remembered the warlock he had kicked, the hunter he had kneed, the titan he had thrown. I'm fast, Deku said simply. I won't miscalculate. Kale looked at the warlock brain titan. He saw the warlock's intellect, but he also saw a terrifying, suicidal lack of self-preservation that he couldn't comprehend. Fine, Kale said coldly. If you want to die for a distraction, I won't stop you. But if you fall, we won't have time to resurrect you until the drill is blown. You'll be down in the mud until the mission is over. I understand, Deku said, his warlock mind shutting off, replaced entirely by the Titan heart. The heart that only knew how to protect. JX, get in position, Kale ordered, drawing a submachine gun. Rookie, try not to die. 3 minutes later, all hell broke loose in the EDZ. Crack. A high-caliber sniper round echoed across the quarry. A Cabal Psion standing on the highest scaffolding of the drill jerked backward, a hole punched clean through its helmet, and plummeted 100 feet to the ground. Crack. Crack. 2 more Psions fell. Down in the mud, the Red Legion erupted into a frenzy. The legionaries roared, raising their heavy slug rifles and firing blindly at the western ridge. The phalanxes locked their shields together, forming an impenetrable wall, and the Colossus turned. The massive beast roared, a sound that shook the earth, and revved its rotary cannon. A torrent of heavy, explosive slugs began to tear apart the western ridge, chewing through the stone and trees where JX-7 was hiding. I have aggro! JX yelled over the comms, laughing maniacally as he dodged explosions. Man, this guy is mad. Calling in the meatballs. From his hiding spot behind a rusted bulldozer at the edge of the quarry, Deku looked up. The gray clouds above parted. High in the atmosphere, he saw the fiery trails of re-entry. 6 Cabal drop pods, massive, spiked spheres of black metal, were plummeting toward the earth. Pods incoming. Aegis warned. Deku, their targeting algorithms have locked onto your light signature. They're adjusting trajectory. Deku closed his eyes. Breathe in, breathe out. He felt the storm in his chest. He grabbed it. Arc cowling, 30%. Green lightning erupted around him, brighter and more violent than before. He didn't just feel fast. He felt weightless, despite the heavy iron boots. The paracausal energy flooded his nervous system, sharpening his perception of time until the falling drop pods seemed to slow down. Now, Deku whispered. He burst from behind the bulldozer. He didn't run. He became a green blur of kinetic energy. He sprinted directly into the center of the Cabal formation. The Cabal infantry saw him coming. A legionary raised its rifle. Deku didn't slow down. He planted his left foot, slid through the thick mud, and drove a fierce, rising uppercut into the Cabal's jaw, launching the massive alien backward into a group of its comrades. Warning! Pod impact in 3 seconds. Aegis shrieked. Deku didn't look up. He relied entirely on his warlock math. He sprinted to his left, sliding underneath the shield of a phalanx. 2 seconds. He popped up behind the phalanx, grabbing the massive Cabal by its armor straps, and hurled it forward. 1 second. Deku channeled the arc into his legs and dove forward, rolling violently through the mud, clearing the blast radius by mere inches. Boom! A 10-ton drop pod smashed into the earth exactly where Deku had been standing 2 seconds prior. The impact hit with the force of a localized earthquake. The shockwave of displaced earth and concussive force sent a dozen Cabal legionaries flying into the air like bowling pins. The pod opened, hiss of pressurized steam releasing, and 4 fresh Cabal stepped out, instantly confused by the chaos. They didn't get a chance to fire. Deku was already moving. He bounced off the side of the newly landed pod, using it as a springboard. He launched himself through the air, completely bypassing a line of phalanxes. Pod 2. 4 seconds. Aegis yelled. Deku landed directly in the center of the largest concentration of Cabal infantry. He stood perfectly still, his green armor glowing like a beacon, taunting them. The Cabal roared, charging him from all sides. 3, 2, 1. Deku engaged a 40% burst of arc to his legs and shot straight up into the air, leaping 30 feet high. Boom! The second drop pod crashed into the center of the Cabal formation, crushing 10 of their own troops instantly. From the high ridge, Kale watched in absolute, stunned silence. The rookie wasn't fighting the Cabal. He was using the Cabal's own orbital artillery to destroy their army. He was a conductor of chaos, perfectly timing his movements to the millisecond, manipulating the enemy's targeting computers with his own body as bait. He's a man, Kale whispered. He's a genius. JX yelled over the comms. Kale, go! The drill is wide open. Kale snapped out of his shock. He focused his void light and blinked, teleporting in a flash of purple light, bypassing the scattered, terrified Cabal infantry, and reappearing at the base of the massive drill. He pulled the explosive charges from his coat and began rapidly attaching them to the primary coolant lines. Up in the air, Deku was falling back to Earth. He was smiling. The math was working. The plan was flawless, but as the old warlock adage goes, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Down in the quarry, JX7 got cocky. Seeing the Cabal ranks in complete disarray, the hunter decided that sniping from the ridge was too boring. He wanted a piece of the action. He wanted the glory. I'm going in! JX yelled, leaping down from the ridge, his jump jets flaring. He drew his hand cannon, fanning the hammer in midair, blasting 3 Cabal before he even hit the ground. Jax, no! Kale screamed from the drill. Get back and cover! The Colossus is still active. JX landed gracefully, spinning his gun. Relax, Kale, I've got this big guy right where I want him. The Colossus turned its massive, heavy helmet toward the hunter. It didn't roar this time. It just raised its left arm. A blinding flash of arc energy erupted from the Colossus's wrist projector. It was a localized suppression missile. It struck the ground directly at JX7's feet. The Exo-Hunter was instantly bathed in a choking, blinding field of dark energy. The suppression field didn't just hurt, it violently disconnected a guardian from the traveler's light. JX gasped, his yellow optics flickering. His mechanical body collapsed to its knees. He couldn't move. He couldn't summon a dodge. He couldn't even pull the trigger of his gun. His ghost, a small orange shell, popped out, sparking frantically, unable to heal him through the suppression. The Colossus slowly lumbered forward, its massive boots shaking the ground. It raised its rotary cannon, pointing it directly at the helpless hunter. And then, a secondary mechanical whine filled the air. The rack on the Colossus's back opened. A dozen micro-missiles primed, locking onto JX. Target acquired. Jax? Kale screamed, abandoning the charges and sprinting toward his teammate, but he was too far away. He couldn't close the distance in time. JX7 looked up at the barrels of the minigun. For the first time in his long, cocky life, the Exo felt true, inescapable dread. He closed his yellow optics. Up in the air, falling toward the mud, Deku saw everything. His warlock brain instantly calculated the trajectory, the payload, and the distance. Missile impact in 1.2 seconds. Kale is 50 meters away. JX is immobile. If the missiles hit, the concussive force will shatter JX's chassis and vaporize his ghost. The math said JX was dead. The Titan heart didn't care about the math. Deku didn't hesitate. He didn't think about his own safety. He didn't think about the fact that if he died down here, he wouldn't be resurrected for hours. He only saw someone who needed to be saved. Deku twisted in midair. He channeled everything he had, 50% arc cowling, into a single, violent burst of forward momentum. BZZZT. He tore through the air like a green thunderbolt. Deku, no! Aegis screamed in his ear. Your armor can't take that payload. Deku didn't listen. Just as the Colossus fired, a swarm of a dozen high-explosive micro-missiles streaking toward the helpless Exo. A blur of greens slammed into the mud directly in front of JX7. Deku stood between the hunter and the Colossus. He didn't have a barricade. He didn't have a void shield. He only had his own body. He spread his arms wide, digging his relic iron boots deep into the earth, and braced for impact. Boom, 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 boom. The missiles hit him point blank. The explosions were deafening, a chain reaction of fire, shrapnel, and concussive force that consumed the green-armored guardian. The sheer kinetic impact pushed Deku backward, his iron boots carving deep trenches in the mud, but he did not fall. He stood his ground, a human shield absorbing the wrath of a Cabal warlord. Behind him, JX7 opened his optics, staring in absolute shock at the boy taking the fire for him. The smoke cleared. Deku was still standing, but barely. His new green armor was utterly destroyed. The chest plate was shattered, exposing the blackened, burnt mesh undersuit. His left arm hung completely useless, dislocated at the shoulder and bleeding profusely. The smiling faceplate of his helmet was cracked in half, revealing one of his emerald eyes, wide and bloodshot, but burning with an unbreakable will. He was breathing in heavy, ragged gasps. Every nerve in his body was screaming. The pain was beyond anything he could comprehend, a blinding, white-hot agony that threatened to shut his brain down. The Colossus stared at him, confused by the human's refusal to die. It revved its rotary cannon, preparing to finish the job. Deku slowly, agonizingly, raised his good right arm. He looked back over his shoulder at JX7. Through the cracked, ruined visor, the hunter saw something that shook him to his mechanical core. The boy was smiling. It was a weak, bloody, trembling smile, but it was genuine. I've got you, Deku whispered, though JX could barely hear him over the roar of the battlefield. Deku turned back to the Colossus. He clenched his right fist. He didn't have 100% left. He barely had 10%. But it was enough. Kale. Now! Deku screamed, pouring the last dregs of his arc light into his fist. He lunged forward, closing the final 10 feet, and drove an arc-infused uppercut directly into the Colossus's chin. The blow didn't shatter the Colossus, but the localized kinetic shockwave knocked the massive alien off balance, causing its head to snap back and exposing its unarmored neck. In a flash of purple light, Kale blinked into existence directly above the Colossus. The awoken warlock didn't use a gun. He channeled the pure, destructive void of a Nova bomb into the palm of his hand, diving downward and slamming the sphere of dark matter directly into the Colossus's exposed neck. The explosion was silent, a vacuum of sound and light that instantly consumed the Colossus, vaporizing its upper half in a burst of purple energy. The headless body of the Cabal commander crashed to the mud. Silence rushed back into the quarry, broken only by the hum of the massive drill. The remaining Cabal infantry, seeing their commander vaporized and half their forces crushed by their own drop pods, broke and fled into the forest. Kale landed softly on his feet, his coat billowing. He looked at the headless Colossus, then turned around. Deku was on his knees in the mud. The green lightning was entirely gone. His warlike brain had shut down. His Titan heart had given everything. He swayed for a moment, then collapsed forward, face first into the dirt. Deku! Aegis materialized, instantly projecting a beam of healing light over the boy's ruined body. JX7, the suppression field finally fading, scrambled to his feet. He rushed over, sliding into the mud next to Deku, his robotic hands hovering over the boy, unsure of what to do. Traveler's light, kid, why did you do that? JX yelled, his voice laced with genuine panic and guilt. You didn't have a shield. You took a full payload. Kale walked over slowly. The warlock's face was unreadable. He looked at the shattered green armor, the blood pooling in the mud, and the boy who had just mathematically orchestrated a masterpiece of a battle, only to throw it all away to act as a meat shield for an idiot hunter. Aegis was working frantically. His ribs are pulverized. Left arm is shattered. Massive internal bleeding. I'm knitting the tissue, but he needs to rest. He needs, Deku groaned, slowly rolling onto his back. He coughed, a splatter of blood hitting the inside of his cracked visor. He reached up with his trembling right hand and pulled the ruined helmet off, letting the cold rain hit his freckled, pale face. Kale knelt beside him, his glowing eyes filled with a mixture of anger and profound confusion. You are an idiot, Kale said, his voice quiet but sharp as glass. You possess a tactical intellect that rivals a core array. You predicted the Cabal orbital logistics. You manipulated an army, and yet, the moment JX made a mistake, you abandoned every tactical advantage to act as a human shield. You could have died, Deku. A permanent death, if the Colossus had targeted your ghost. Deku looked up at the awoken warlock. He was in agony, but he didn't look away. A tactical advantage doesn't mean anything, Deku breathed, wincing as Aegis's light painfully fused his ribs back together. If I have to watch someone die to keep it. Kale stared at him. It is a war, Deku. Sacrifices are required. Not while I'm here, Deku said, his voice surprisingly firm despite his injuries. I don't care about the math, Kale. If someone needs help, my body just moves on its own. JX7 sat back in the mud, his yellow optics dimming slightly in shame. Kid. I'm sorry. I got cocky. You shouldn't have had to do that. Deku turned his head, offering the EXO a warm, reassuring smile. It was the same smile he wore on his armor. The smile that promised safety. It's okay, JX. We're a team, right? Kale looked at the boy's smile. It was entirely irrational. It defied all Vanguard logic, all warlock teachings of self-preservation and efficiency. The boy was a tactical genius who fought like a rabid titan, with a heart so suicidally selfless it bordered on madness. Kale sighed, a long, tired sound. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, glowing detonator. Yes. We are a team, Kale said softly. He pressed the button. Behind them, the primary coolant lines on the massive Cabal drill detonated. The explosions chained up the side of the machine, resulting in a catastrophic failure that tore the monolithic structure apart in a spectacular shower of fire and shrapnel. The heat of the explosion washed over them, pushing back the cold rain of the EDZ. Kale stood up, offering his hand to the battered, green-haired rookie. Come on, Titan, Kale said, the condescension finally gone from his voice. Let's get you home. Deku looked at the hand, smiled, and took it.